Hello there and welcome to this workshop. My name is Chris Butler and I'll be your guide for the next 45 minutes. Some of you may know me already. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, and I also have a YouTube channel where I teach tarot skills. Most importantly, however, you'll probably know me as a deck creator. I illustrated Kay Stopforth's Quantum Tarot, which is published by Lo Scarabeo, and I'm also the writer and illustrator for the Sun Tarot, published by Schiffer Books, and the Healing Light Tarot, published by Lo Scarabeo. Now, my tarot journey goes back 41 years. I discovered the cards when I was 13, and that was through watching the James Bond film Live and Let Die, which featured tarot very heavily. Now, at that time, my fascination and my interest lay in the possibility of fortune telling, the possibility of predicting the future, but also very much in the beauty and the mystery of the cards. Hence my ambition to create my own deck one day. And thankfully that's an ambition that I've realized several times over. Fast forward to my 30s, and that's when the tarot took on a much deeper significance in my life. In my 30s, I learned to use the tarot alongside professional therapy. Tarot was the therapeutic tool that helped me to recover from a nervous breakdown. And it helped me to process the trauma of religious abuse and having been put through gay conversion therapy as a teenager and a young man in my 20s. So in effect, you could say that tarot was my lifesaver. What I learned through that period of my life is that the tarot is a roadmap of the human condition. It provides us with a framework for understanding our own life experiences, be they positive or negative, and it allows us to process those experiences and move forward in our lives. The tarot is a picture book of who we can be and what we can become. It's an amazing tool. We can identify ourselves with each and every character depicted in the images of the tarot. And that's why, in a very real sense, we are the magician. So let's meet him and let's discover how we're connected to him. I want to show you my second deck. Now, I bought this when I was 13. It's a blue box Rider-Waite, and my copy is still one of my most treasured possessions, and it's one of my most frequently used reading decks. So you can see the lid came off the box and the first thing I saw was the Magician card, and I think it's probably the same today. If you buy the modern equivalent of this deck in a US Games yellow box, when you take the deck out, the Magician will always be the first card. So the Magician is very often people's first encounter with a character from the tarot. Now, this wasn't the only deck I bought. In my early days of tarot exploration, I bought myself a selection of classic decks to give myself a wider idea of what the tarot was about. And I soon discovered that the Magician that I'd encountered in the Rider deck looked very different in some of the other decks. And more so, I began to realize that this was a figure of two faces. He was a Jekyll and Hyde. So what I want to do is show you some of my other decks and show you what I discovered. You know, I discovered that there is a light and dark aspect to the Magician. So let's have a look at the light aspect first. So here's my Rider-Waite Smith deck, and one of the other early decks that I bought, the Thoth Tarot by Aleister Crowley and Frieda Harris. Now these two represent what I'm going to refer to as the light aspect of this card. These two represent the transformative magician. So to me, this is a very powerful figure, and this is a force for good. But let's look at some of the other decks. Now, the ones I'm going to show you are some of the earlier, more traditional decks, with one exception, which I'll explain in a minute. And these represent what I'm going to refer to as the dark aspect. We've looked at the transformative magician. These represent the deceptive magician. So here we are. At the top is my treasured Swiss Swan JJ Tarot, which I bought at the same time as my Rider-Waite deck. We've also got here a reproduction of the Visconti Sforza Tarot. Now, that was one of my earliest purchases. I was interested because I'd heard that this was one of the earliest surviving decks. At the bottom, we've got a classic Grimaud Tarot de Marseille. And I'll say at this point, that as most of you will know, the Tarot de Marseille became the most popular pattern within the earlier pre-20th century types of tarot deck. To the right is the one exception. This is the modern deck. This is the Fergus Hall Tarot that was featured in Live and Let Die. But I've included it here because his magician follows the pattern of these earlier cards. So these are what I'm going to refer to as the dark aspect of the magician card. You can see here that in French he's even given a different title, which has a very different meaning, which we'll look at as well. So, two conflicting personalities in one major arcana card. The former magician, the first one we looked at in the Rider-Waite Smith deck, and then secondarily in the Thoth, I see him as a transformative person, a channeler of divine energy, and that's actually backed up by what the Order of the Golden Dawn called him. They referred to him as the Magus of Power. By contrast, let's look to the right at Le Bateleur from the 1760s Marseille Tarot. This is not a transformative figure. This is not an empowered supernatural magician. What we see here is a fakir, a trickster, and a fraudster. So I think for us to make sense of these two figures and to find some common ground between them, I think we need to look much more closely at these two cards. So I want us to start off with the magician in the Waite Smith tradition. And here he is, on his own. The Rider-Waite Smith Tarot, published by Rider & Sons in 1909, conceived by Arthur Edward Waite and drawn by our beloved Pamela Coleman Smith. Let's look at him closely. His right hand, he's holding a wand and he's reaching up to the heavens. I think to touch the divine and to connect with divine energy. Now, by contrast, his right hand is pointing downwards towards the earth. And in magical terms, this makes his body a conduit and a channel. He is a lightning conduit, if you think of divine energy as lightning energy. He's connecting the divine and the earthly realms, so that brings to mind that age-old saying, as above, so below. This is a connecting and unifying figure. So let's look at some of the other symbols in the card, because they make so much more sense again of what's going on. There's two colours that are really glaring out here, red and white. We'll look at the yellow background later, but for now, red and white, both in the magician's garments and also in the flowers that he's surrounded with. So, red and white, the colours of passion and purity, respectively. Where the flowers are concerned, roses are the flower of passion, whereas lilies are the symbol of purity. So, we've got those two factors reflected in his robes. The interesting thing is it's the undergarment that is white with this magician. So that tells us that purity comes first in his intention. So his undergarment is one of purity, and then it's cloaked with passion. So we know that those passions have good intentions. Okay? He's also wearing a white headband. So that takes his personal purity up to the realm of his thoughts specifically, and the intentions that come from them. What an amazing figure. So if that wasn't enough, we then see the lemniscate symbol, the horizontal figure of 8 floating above his head. Now, the lemniscate is the symbol of infinity. Again, that is another symbol of the infinite power that is at his disposal. The lemniscate is not part of him. The lemniscate is not really crowning him, but it is floating above his head, almost like a benevolent presence. So that says to me that the power being offered to him and the power at his disposal is infinite. Roses and lilies below, but there is only roses above. So that says to me that what he's reaching up towards is actually fiery, passionate, powerful. Actually something that's an energy you don't take lightly. Interestingly, the manifestation of that energy on the ground is a mixture of passion and purity. So that says to me that as the fiery, passionate energy is manifested, it's manifested for the good in this image. Okay. Have a look at his belt, because the lemniscate, the meaning of the lemniscate above his head is also reflected in the belt that is actually holding the garment of purity around his waist. You can see, if you look very closely, that the belt is shaped like a serpent that is actually biting and devouring its own tail. So this is, in magical terms, the Ouroboros, the snake that eats itself and goes round in circles. It's another symbol of infinity. So what is benevolently floating above him is also girding him, which is very powerful. He's girded by infinity and tapping into infinite power. So that's the magician. We've looked at the flowers surrounding him, and we've looked at his garments. Let's have a look at what's on the table, because these are the tools that are at his disposal for his magical work and for shaping and channeling the power that he's tapping into. What we have on the magician's table are what we will see later on in the tarot as the 4 suits of the minor arcana. So these 4 symbols, the 4 suits, are also the 4 symbols of ritual magic, and they represent the 4 elements. So that says to me that this incredibly powerful figure, channeling divine energy and manifesting divine energy, has the ability to shape and influence the material world. What makes up the material world are tools at his disposal on his table. That's incredible. The pentacle, symbolizing the power of the earth, the power of the earth at his disposal. The sword, representing the power of air at his disposal. The wand, representing the power of fire, the element of fire at his disposal, at his command. And finally, the cup, the power of water, the power of intuition, the power of the emotions. All of those incredible things, the power of foresight, insight at his disposal, his to command, his to shape, his to manipulate. That is a very powerful figure, We mentioned as well, the other main colour in this card is the yellow background. Now, elementally, yellow is the colour of the spirit and also the colour of air. So we are immediately aligning this figure to the element of air, and traditionally he's also associated with Mercury, the fleet-foot god, the messenger, a swift one. So look closely at the Thoth card and you will see that association very, very powerfully depicted. Okay. So whereas in the Rider card, we see that elemental connection depicted in the sky, you can see that it's actually the magician, the Magus himself, who is depicted in yellow. So the colour of air, but you can also see in this image that he is standing in front of the staff of Hermes. So Hermes, Mercury, the god of air. Again, very, very powerful association. So what can we say about this figure? I mean, that is a hell of a lot to take in. This is a very, very empowered figure, girded in purity and passion. He has the power to do good. He has the power to transform. He has the power to change and to influence. Okay, so if we're to see somebody like that in a positive way, this person, be it man or woman, has to have self-confidence, they have to have integrity, and they have to know their own abilities and be in control of their own abilities. If you were going to take that into the realm of I and make it personal, this person would say, I can do this, I can do that, I can transform this, I can channel this, I can influence this, I can change this, all for the good. Okay? Such a person has to have a healthy self-image. They have to know themselves, they have to be at ease with themselves, they have to love themselves, they have to be able to forget themselves to concentrate on the channeling, the transformation, and all of the other wonderful, magical things that they do. In psychological terms, you would call the magician a high-functioning personality, okay? That makes him or her strong, successful, stable, and happy. Okay, so that is the positive aspect of this major arcana number 1. At this stage, to look at the dark aspect, we're going to go back to those earlier cards and look at the BATELEUR, the dark aspect, as I see him, of this arcana. This is a very different figure, different title. It wasn't long before I started to realise that Le Bateleur is not necessarily, a literal French translation of the magician. Something very different. Le Bateleur. In French, literally performer. Now that's not a powerful magician. In Italian, il bagatella or il bagatto, someone of little importance. That's a far cry from our important and powerful magician. This is a fairground conjurer, a fairground magician, or a juggler. This is a con artist. This is a real con artist. And this is a peddler. This is someone who charges for them to demonstrate their fakery and trickery at a fair, at a circus, on the street. What else can I say? Let me show you a couple of examples of Le Bateleur in not real life, but actually in storytelling, in television, and in film. Here's one of my favourites. Let me introduce you to one of my favourite children's books. This is by John Masefield, and it's called The Box of Delights. The main character in The Box of Delights is a schoolboy called Kay Harker, and when we first meet him, he's travelling home for the Christmas holidays from boarding school. Now, what you see here is two of the most colourful villains from The Box of Delights. They are henchmen to the villainous Abner Brown, But when Kay meets them on the train coming home from school, they are posing as clergymen. They are completely bogus, totally unscrupulous. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to introduce you to them because they are one of the best embodiments of the BATELEUR in literature that I've ever come across. So Kay Harker is on the train. The bogus clergymen enter his carriage, small talk him, and they talk him into letting them show him a couple of card tricks. And he loses. He thinks he's spotted the lady, but when he turns the card over, it's a low-ranking heart. And of course, they tell him that he really, as he's lost, he should donate money to the poor box. So, in effect, he got swindled. And the clergymen disappear off the train, and the boy loses his pocket money. That, to me, is our BATELEUR all over. Somebody with no real power, but someone who uses illusion to give an appearance of power, which it's exactly what our bogus clergymen were doing with their card tricks. The BATELEUR is somebody not to be trusted, whereas our magician was clothed in purity. The BATELEUR is certainly not a pure character, and he's clothed in deception. The magician gives. The BATELEUR is somebody who takes away rather than giving. Think of the card sharks. The poor boy loses the card trick game, and they emotionally blackmail him into giving them money under false pretenses. Not nice. So, let's talk about those earliest decks. In the earliest decks, this figure represented the lowest rung of humanity. It's a far cry from our all-powerful magician, isn't it? He represented the soul of appetite. So it's all of those. This is the dark side of appetite, greed, uncontrolled cravings, all of those sort of things. Caitlin Matthews summed him up beautifully in her book Untitled Tarot. When she's talking about him, she refers to the art of distraction, which is very different from the focused activity of the Waite-Smith magician. Le BATELEUR is someone who observes society, people, his surroundings, humanity at large. He observes them very closely. But when the truth doesn't fit what he wants you to believe, he will gaslight you. Not nice. That takes us on to my next example, this time from film. One of my favourite films, and it's called Gaslight. Now, there were two films, both of the same story within a couple of years. My favourite is the one that you can see on the left with Anton Walbrook. The most famous of the two starred Ingrid Bergman, and that's the one that you will probably all know. Gaslight is the story of a husband who manipulates his wife through lies and deception to convince her that she is going insane. His motive in doing this is to conceal his own past as her aunt's murderer and to gain control of her hidden inheritance. To do this, to convince her that she's insane with the intention of eventually getting her locked away, he steals things from her. But when she notices, he insinuates that she must have lost them. He'll hide his own belongings and then insinuate to her that she has stolen them, but she doesn't remember. He hides her things, He insinuates that she's stolen his, and he is constantly undermining her sense of herself, what has really happened, and calling into question her power of memory. Okay. He has moved his wife into what was her aunt's house. His wife obviously doesn't know that he was her aunt's murderer. He is insinuating that she is insane to get her out of the way. But all the time he's doing this, he is secretly searching the sealed off attics to find the aunt's hidden fortune and jewellery. What's actually happening, his wife notices that there are times in the night when the gas lights go down and flicker. And she begins to realise that there is somebody else in the house, as she thinks. But once again, her husband tells her that she is hallucinating. That can't be real. She is imagining it. Okay? Very, very sinister. Let me read you some definitions of gaslighting. These are from TRACY MALONE. Gaslighting is an attempt to change the truth. Gaslighting is implanted narratives cloaked in secrecy. Gaslighting are lies with a purpose to confuse and control. Gaslighting is mind control to make victims doubt their reality. Now, looking at the fairground trickster, that might seem a little harsh, but what is he doing? Gaslighting is akin to the BATELEUR's efforts to deceive by sleight of hand, just in the same way that the two fake clergymen attempted to defraud Kay Harker with their card tricks. Do you see what I'm getting at? His core intention is to deceive. His core intention, with all of those tricks laid out on the table, and as you can see from the card, his table doesn't have powerful magical symbols. His table has cheap party tricks and magic tricks. His intention is to deceive you and convince you that he has magical powers. He makes things disappear. He wants you to think that he's done it by magic. He's actually done it by sleight of hand and by deception. So if we think of the gaslighter, gaslighting as a psychological term comes from the name of the film, as you can see why. Le Bateleur has imposter syndrome. He does not have the supreme confidence of the magician. He has no magical powers. He has no supernatural powers. He has to deceive you into thinking that he has. He has to deceive you into thinking that he is in control. He has imposter syndrome. If we think about that in psychological terms, Le Bateleur would be a person with low self-image. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't transform that. Where does that go to next? He's a person with a lack of moral fibre, because the next logical step to that is, if I can't do this, I'll have to fake it. So, in therapy terms, Le Bateleur is a low-functioning personality. Entertainment is used as a mask for dishonesty. So, in the Marseille card, this is not a person to be trusted. And exactly in the same way as with the curates in the Box of Delight, Le Bateleur will deceive you and defraud you. Far cry from the magician. So, to sum up, Le Bateleur is what I refer to as one of the two false starts on the Fool's journey. Whereas by contrast in the Rider deck, when the Fool meets the Magician, he's meeting a very positive character. Let's just put him in context. We can see him in context of the High Priestess and La Papesse, because there's something similar going on there. In the earlier decks, Le Bateleur is the symbol of material trickery and dishonesty. Unlike the High Priestess in the modern decks, La Papesse is a symbol of spiritual trickery and dishonesty because she was a symbol of heresy. The female pope, the Pope Joan, the pope that should never have been. She was kind of almost like one of the jokes and gags in the early tarot decks. She was a kind of poking fun at the church and an irreverent poke at the Pope. So when we get to Waite's deck, we've often heard of Waite referring to his deck as the rectified tarot, glorifying the ignoble as he saw it. Le Bateleur goes from the trickster to the divine magus. That character has been transformed. La Papesse goes from the heretic to the guardian of the divine feminine. You also see it with a couple of other cards as well. L'amoureux, the lover in the Marseille deck. We see the mischief of Cupid in that deck, whereas in Waite's deck we see divinely ordained union between two lovers. And lastly, Le Pendu, the hangman. In the earlier decks and in the Marseille deck, you see that figure as a traitor, but in Waite's deck, he becomes the selfless martyr. So that helps us to put Le Bateleur in context. But what we need to know is how we're going to reconcile these two figures. If we want to read with a Waite deck, or if we want to read with a Marseille deck, are we dealing with two completely disconnected figures? I don't think we are. So, looking to reconcile them, Le Bateleur and the Magician, I see in terms of tarot reversals. And for me, I've come to see them as the reversal of each other. They are the two sides of the same coin. I view Le Bateleur as the reversal and the dark side of the Magician. So, in effect, he would be the equivalent of the Magician reversed in a reading I was doing with a Rider-Waite deck. If I'm using a pre-Waite-Smith deck, I take the dark aspect of the Bateleur, everything that we've just discussed. I take that to be the primary meaning of the card. So if he then appears reversed in a reading with one of those earlier decks, that's when I revert back to seeing the positive aspects of the character of the Magician. What I want to do is I want to explore that, and I want us to do that through a reading. Okay? This is a spread that I devised, and I call this the Jekyll and Hyde spread. We are all the Magician. You know, we will all find aspects of the Magician in ourselves. We can use that card and as a mirror, and it will mirror back parts of each one of us. We can manifest change and channel positive energy. That said, we are all equally capable of self-sabotage, deception, untruthful behaviour, and damaging the lives of others. So this spread I've designed to highlight our Magician and trickster energies so that we can understand how they fight against each other, but also how we can ultimately overcome the trickster and manifest our positive, powerful Magician. So here we go. Join me in this reading and let's see what comes out of it. So I'd like for us to explore all of this through a sample reading using a card spread I've devised especially for this workshop. As I've said, we're all the Magician. We can all manifest change and channel positive energy, but we're all equally capable of self-sabotage, deception, untruthful behaviour, and damaging the lives of others. The spread is designed to help us to understand the strengths of our inner magician, but also to show how our inner trickster might try to undermine us. Ultimately, we need to reconcile the two, so the final card in the spread will help us to do that. So here we are. I call this the Jekyll and Hyde spread, reminding us that the magician and le BATELEUR are one and the same person, us. You can see that the top three cards, as above, reveal aspects of our inner magician, while the bottom three, so below, deal with our inner BATELEUR. The seventh card gives us insight on how to reconcile the two. So let's start. Card number 1. In which ways do I resemble a magician? Now you can see that in my sample reading, I've drawn the Wheel of Fortune. So that tells me that I have the power to initiate change. Now, if I look at that wheel and it feels big and unmovable, I know that all I have to do is raise my figurative wand to heaven and draw down the energy that I need to give me the strength that I need to move that wheel. So in practical terms, if I can't do it under my own steam, the magician tells me that divine energy, or with the support of my support network, I can turn that wheel. I have the power to initiate change for the good, which is wonderful. Okay, so we've looked at the magician, but we also want to know in this reading, in which ways do I resemble le BATELEUR? So for me, I've drawn the Hierophant. Now that immediately tells me a few home truths about myself. The Hierophant, in his positive aspect, is wise. He's a spiritual teacher. He's a guardian of tradition. Now, put him in the position of the BATELEUR, who has imposter syndrome. That points to my weakness for me, sometimes trying to make out I know a little bit more than I do. I also, when I looked at this card, I identified with my own propensity to be dogmatic. I can be stubborn, and I can be too rigid in what I believe sometimes. So in this position, there are immediately qualities that I need to pay attention to, and I need to acknowledge that they're holding me back and probably having a negative effect on the people around me. Okay. Let's move on to card number 3, as above again. Card 3, what's my transformative power? So this was a strange one for me. I've drawn the Devil, but that immediately encourages me to know that I have the ability to face my fears and my dark side head on with a view to transforming it. So that does give me hope, because it points me to the times in my life where I've been able to look into myself and at the darkness in myself in a positive way, and in a way that confronts it, in a way that shines a light onto it. And once again, as the magician, that tells me that I have the ability to raise my wand, draw down the power I need to shine light into that darkness. So it's a dark card, but actually in this position, it tells us something very positive and very powerful. Card number 4. Once again, we're in the below realm. So this card asks, what's my brand of imposter syndrome? This is probably one of the most uncomfortable asks in the read. So here we go. I've drawn the Temperance card. I immediately relate to this. This tells me that I have the ability to bluff it in terms of convincing people that I am a lot more balanced than I look. So I have to pay attention to those times when I might possibly need help. I might possibly have to admit that I'm vulnerable or that I'm on shaky ground, but my pride is getting in the way. Temperance appearing in this position is showing that the emotional balance is an illusion. So once again, something to be aware of, not just for myself, but that tells me that if I'm bluffing it and if I'm pretending to the people around me that I'm all right, that has a knock-on effect. This can also talk about pride creeping in. If I'm bluffing it that I'm all right, I could be smugly giving advice to people from a very shaky corner. And that means that they are most certainly not going to benefit from my lack of wisdom. So again, this is my particular pretension. I have to learn that if things aren't all right, if I am not stable, if I am vulnerable, I have to learn the skill of fessing up and owning up and actually displaying my weakness. Okay. Card number 5. How can I use my powers to build people up? So in this sample reading for me, I'm very pleased with what I drew here because we've drawn the star. And the star is a card of hope and a card of optimism. So that sort of makes me look at myself and look to the power that my optimism can have on the people around me. If I'm not feeling optimistic, once again, I have the power of as the magician to actually hold my wand up, look outside of myself and draw down a divine perspective. So this card tells me that I have the ability to look outside of myself to see the good, to see the potential, to see the hope. The star is also a wish card. So I'm particularly pleased I drew that in this card in this position, because it tells me that I have the potential to be able to manifest my wishes, which again is wonderful. So if I've got the ability to manifest my wishes, how am I going to mess it up? Let's have a look at card number 6. How do I self-sabotage or sabotage others? And I've drawn the 9 of Cups, the indulgence card. It's interesting because the star is a card of wishes in its positive aspect. The 9 of Cups is a card of wishes too. But we've drawn this in a negative aspect, as an aspect of our inner trickster, of my inner trickster. I'm seeing the indulgence aspect of this. I'm seeing the aspect of this character that when the going gets tough, I will just run away into frivolous fun seeking, into simple pleasures, basically avoidance tactics. You know, rather than face up to the reality of what's going on, I'll just go out there and have a good time and hope that it goes away. So it's interesting that both of these cards deal with wishes, but above we have something in my reading, we have something very powerful and the ability to manifest positive change. Whereas below, in the position of card number 6, if I'm self-sabotaging, I just take the easy way out. I take the sugar rush and the quick fix rather than playing the long game. So can you see where this spread is going? This is obviously for me, but I'd encourage you to try this spread for yourself and see what comes out. Let's look at the final card. This is an important one. We've got these 2 rows. We've got our row of positive, wonderful, affirming magician energies above and our trickster energies below that potentially stop us from reaching our potential. With card number 7, I'm asking the question, how must I change to move forward? And I've drawn the 5 of Cups. And for me, that is a really powerful answer to this reading as a whole, because the Five of Cups shows losses, but it also shows what I still have. So there's gains and losses in this card. Look at those 3 cups there. Those 3 cups to me represent the 3 aspects of the trickster that I've just had to face in this reading. So they're my spilt cups. You know, the inflexibility of my, the dark aspect of my Hierophant, where the Temperance card is concerned, you know, my ability to pretend that I'm stable and all right when I'm not. My ability to run away from facing responsibility or challenges and just, you know, dash into frivolity with the 9. There they are represented in those 3 cups there. But behind is the potential of the 2 full cups, and also the potential of the journey that this card offers over the bridge and on to the church, crossing the river to a final destination. So this card tells me that I've just got to be realistic about my deficiencies and my losses. I've got to be aware of them, because by being aware of them, I won't always fall into the trap that my trickster lays for me. But also I've got to keep my eyes on the prize. I've got to look to the positive strengths that the top 3 cards have shown to me. And I have to focus on those and cling to them, because they're the cards that in this 5 of Cups will allow me to turn to the 2 full cups and also to pick them up and continue that journey over the river and on to the church or castle or whatever it is that Pamela Coleman Smith has depicted there. So this card for me is a message about being realistic about myself. So there you have it. I hope that just by briefly explaining my personal reading, I hope that's helped you to understand how this spread works. Do try it for yourself. I hope that you've found this workshop instructive. I've certainly enjoyed presenting this to you. Thank you for watching and listening, and I hope to see you sometime soon.